Hello, my name's Wyatt Waters, and I'm the level designer on Team Moon. In this video, I'll be going over the level design for each area in Skeletron.exe. This will include my objectives for each encounter and how I achieve them. At the start of the game, the player finds themselves in a small storage room. Since they've just entered the simulation, so to speak, the main purpose of this room is to familiarize the player with the basic controls. To help guide that process, this room has been filled with handy signs and tons of destructible props. To proceed, the player only needs to break down the yellow door at the end of the room. Once that door breaks, the player enters an introductory combat encounter on the ground floor of a bar. In crafting this space, I aimed to give players as strong a first impression of our game's shooting as possible. To that end, I prioritize making this moment exciting rather than tense or difficult. During the bullet time initiated with the door kick, the player has ample time to line up their shots and dispatch the enemies present. At its core, this encounter is target practice, camouflaged as cinematic combat. When the player climbs the stairs in this room, they are ambushed by 4 more skeletons. This moment is the true introduction of the melee skeleton enemies, as they aren't the fish in a barrel from a moment ago. To make this moment an effective introduction, I spawn the skeletons relatively close to the player, so that they likely need to move away in order to avoid a hit. Additionally, I placed enough enemies that the player wouldn't be able to defeat all of them before having to think about their behavior, but not so many that the player would be overwhelmed. This scene is also emblematic of how the melee skeletons are used throughout the game, as they frequently lurk behind objects and corners, catching the player off guard. When the player leaves the bar, they find the stairwell up has been obstructed with rubble. To progress, they'll need to platform along the exterior of the bar instead. The goal of this section is to further develop the player's platforming skills. Across these first few gaps, the player will need to use their jump and double jump. After they turn the corner, the player is introduced to a new enemy type, the Skeleton Archer. Just as the melee skeleton's introduction highlighted its strengths, this area gives the archer a sniper's alley, in which the player has nowhere to hide. As a lone enemy, however, it is easy enough to dispatch. The final jump of this section requires both the player's jumps and their dash to cross. This ensures that the player knows how to use their dash before they progress. From here, the player kicks in another door to enter the first floor of the warehouse. This encounter aims to evolve the challenge posed by the melee skeletons. This is achieved by combining them with tighter paths and heavily restricted sightlines, markedly increasing the tension. When the player climbs the boxes in the back of the warehouse, they are reintroduced to the skeleton archers. This time, however, they are more plentiful, and the player is exposed while on top of the boxes. To reach a safer position, the player must platform across the boxes while avoiding shots from the archers above. Once on the catwalk, the player can more easily deal with them. There are also several explosive barrels here, which help the player do exactly that. After exiting the warehouse, the player finds a low platform with a checkered wall that extends up to an opening. This moment exists simply to introduce the player to the wall climbing mechanic. At the top of the stairs, a few melee skeletons await the player. On the roof of the bar, the player encounters an arena with melee skeletons, skeleton archers, and climbable walls. This section aims to test the player on everything they've learned so far by having them contend with all these elements at once. In pursuit of that goal, this encounter is built as a firefight, with reinforcements arriving throughout. Melee skeletons on the ground flush the player out of cover, while skeleton archers shoot from above. This arena supports several different approaches to surviving the enemy onslaught. To escape from the archer's fire, the player can take refuge under the tower or behind boxes around the arena. If the player prefers a more aggressive playstyle, they can instead climb the walls on the sides of the arena to close in on the archers. After clearing them out, the remaining melee skeletons are easy to dispatch. Finally, the exit of this arena evolves the wall climbing mechanic by putting two climbable walls near each other, allowing the player to jump between them to reach the top. The following room aims to lower the intensity from the previous encounter, while also introducing a new enemy type, the shield skeleton. This enemy takes multiple shots to kill and can only be damaged from certain angles, making it tricky to handle. These objectives are met by having the player fight this enemy in isolation. This gives the player a new type of challenge, as they are fighting one complex enemy rather than many simple ones. Once the shield skeleton has been defeated, an elevator shaft opens up. This area further expands the wall climbing mechanic by having the player jump between a series of climbable walls before finally landing inside a suspended elevator. After kicking in the elevator door, the player enters the final area before the game's boss fight. As such, this area's goal is to test the player's mastery over the three skeleton enemy types. Through a series of small combats, the player is tested on multiple combinations of these enemies, including all three types at once. Once the player has jumped down the pit at the top of the tower, they arrive in the final fight with Skeletron. This first arena focuses on demonstrating Skeletron's attacks and behavior. Since the player is seeing all of this for the first time, they are given ample cover and space to dodge. On top of this, they also have some now familiar melee skeletons to deal with. After shooting out Skeletron's eyes, the player must transverse to the next arena. To do this, they can either jump between a series of wall climbs or use a fire escape. Once in the second arena, the player will find that Skeletron uses the same attacks. This time, however, the player has skeleton archers to handle, which are perched atop towers. After shooting out Skeletron's eyes once more, the player has a small gauntlet of platforming to get through, followed by an encounter that uses all enemy types once more. Again, these sections of the game test the player's mastery over all elements of the game system. In falling through the chute, the player finds themselves in a server room. Skeletron uses the same attacks as before, but this time a large server in the center of the room gives him some cover. Additionally, some shield skeletons are posted up in this room, further complicating the player's victory. In defeating Skeletron here, the player will have learned, practiced, and mastered all mechanics in the game. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw here, head to wwaters.me to see more of my work, including more details about Skeletron.exe.